I'm guessing that there are at least a few garments in your wardrobe that fit you okay, but you've kind of fallen out of love with. Or maybe you fancy injecting even more of your personality and style into your handmade wardrobe. This week, I'm bringing you a conversation with legendary sewing and craft teacher, Cal Patch. Cal shares heaps of tips, tricks and info on how you could go about embellishing your clothes to create a deeper connection to the items you own. I've been wanting to speak to Cal for basically ever, and it was every bit as awesome as I suspected it would be, so please stick around a couple of minutes for the conversation. Welcome to Check Your Thread, the podcast that will help you sew more sustainably. My name's Zoe and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 16 years and I'm the creator and host of the popular Handmade Wardrobe Challenge, Me Made May. But, like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis, and I'm looking at the way that my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. And I really hope you'll join me in this journey. Hello, lovely listener. Are you doing okay? Thank you for choosing to hang out with me for a bit. I am very grateful. Have you had any sustainability wins since we last hung out together? Like so many people in the Northern Hemisphere at this time of year, I've been getting my sew on, the SOW version. And this week, some of my tomato and sweet pea seeds have germinated. Honestly, it feels like magic every single time, you know. Each year, I kind of worry that the seed magic won't work this year, but it does. I recently became the custodian of a very overgrown allotment plot, but I've been diligently digging over the beds in part of it, so there'll definitely be space for the plants to eventually get planted out in a couple of months. If you like growing stuff and want to chat about it, please do hit me up via Instagram or email because I love to natter about food growing. And there's also a gardening chat section of the community chat spaces in the Check Your Thread Patreon. So that's a fun way to see what the other growers in the community are up to. Speaking of the Check Your Thread Patreon, this week I am honoured to be able to thank these wonderful people for signing up to support the podcast. Jenny, Delia, Di, Deborah, Jacqueline and Marielle. Honestly, it makes my heart sing every time that someone signs up because it shows that the podcast means something to that person and that they want to see it continue and flourish. Thanks again to all the Patreon supporters, past and present. Okay, let's metaphorically jump into the main bit of the episode. So when I was communicating with Cal in advance of our conversation, it was clear that she didn't really want to go into her whole backstory again, as she's gone over it in other podcasts previously. But she's got such an interesting one. So may I recommend 2 other podcasts that she's been featured on that you should go and check out after listening to this one. So there's the Making Conversation podcast, and the episode is called Colour Discovering Your Craft with Cal Patch. That's episode 90. And then there's also the Pattern Shift podcast, and that episode is called Taking Yourself Seriously as a Business Owner with Cal Patch, and that's episode 63. But do make sure you listen to this one first. You're about to hear such a load of useful advice and interesting insights. For example, there's tips on where to position embellishments on your garments. And there's tips on laundering embellished garments. And more broadly, what Cal believes are the best ways to learn a new creative skill so that it sticks. Oh, and you'll hear what Cal's guilty pleasure purchase is when she visits craft stores. So until next week, take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. Consider sowing some seeds to get your grow on and enjoy. I'm trying to not be a bit nervous because I'm not even joking. Like, you've been on my list of people I wanted to talk to since before the podcast actually started, which is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to be nervous too, I feel the same way. Like, I've wanted to be on Zoe's podcast for so long, but I just never could think of what the angle would be. Like,
Exactly. Because like I've been a fan of your work. I was trying to figure this out definitely since 2009, because I know that I had your book, Do It Yourself Clothes, Pattern Making Simplified, when I lived in Spain. And I lived in Spain between 2008 and 2010. So I know that I knew who you were then. For the same, yeah, I'm not sure quite why taken this long, but I think that when I saw that you post about your forthcoming workshop, which is The Artful Garment, about embellishing clothes, I was like, this is the angle. This is it. This is it.
Yay.
Awesome. So let's start. Could you tell us who you are, where you are, and what fills your days?
Yes. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Cal Patch, and yes, that really is my last name, which is pretty funny since I teach mending. I guess it was my destiny, is what I like to say. I live in New York State, about 2 hours north of New York City, in a very small town in the country. And what fills my days? So many things. I do so many different textile and fiber arts. I guess making clothing is sort of the overarching thing that I do, and then everything else is like a part of that, because I sew, I crochet, I draft patterns, I embroider, I print and spin yarn, and you name it, I'll try it, if it's related to fiber and text.
And you'll be really good at it, and then you'll teach it as well.
Probably. Most likely, yes.
So in terms of what you do, like you teach a lot, don't you? You do that online and you do that in person. And I know that you travel as well. Is that a big part of your days currently?
Yes. Right now is sort of the quiet time where I don't travel, because like right now there's about, 8 inches of snow on the ground and lots of ice. So I don't really travel in the winter because it makes me nervous to drive around. But from something like March or April through to November, I travel a little too much. I'm trying to scale it back because I love the traveling. It's not necessarily like very or exotic traveling. It's mostly in like the northeast of the United States. I teach a lot in Maine and New Hampshire. So it's like often a 4 or 5 hour drive, and I'm usually there for like a week. And it's really fun and I love it, but I also love to be home. I'm very much a homebody, and I hate that I miss out on a lot of my garden season. Like, I'm the gardener in the house, but then I'm away for much of the garden time. But that's why building up the virtual classes that I've been doing has been really great, because they're allowing me to transition towards being home more and traveling a little bit less, which I think is definitely the direction I'm leaning toward.
Yeah, and then more people as well can participate in your classes as well.
I know. It's been very exciting having people from around the world take my classes. It's been amazing, because I never would have thought I could stay home and teach classes to people in the UK and Australia. Like, yeah, it's wild and very cool.
That's amazing. Right, so most people who listen to this podcast are garment makers, and I think that many of us who make our own clothes tend to get to the end of sewing a garment and we kind of consider it done. And obviously you have to make a lot of decisions along the way to make that garment exist, such as what pattern to use if you're using a pattern, which view you're going to make, like what fabric or the fastenings, etc. But often that's kind of like the end of our creative design input, and the rest of our involvement is like just putting it together and fitting. I'm making an assumption here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that you view sewing or thrifting a garment, or even finding one that's already in your own wardrobe, as kind of almost like the start of a project, or that all garments could then be the canvas for more. Like, would you say that's true?
Yeah, I like the way you're putting it. I don't know that I've thought of it that way before, but I totally see, like, in many ways, yes, it is like once you've got the garment in its completed state, although maybe it's maybe what we're talking about is like adding and embellishing to the garment once it is a garment. But then some of the things I might do could happen before it's even a finished garment too. But that's like an aside that we can maybe circle back to. But yeah, I do love the idea of a garment as a blank canvas. So, like, there are just so many things you can do. So, I mean, obviously, making your own clothes or thrifting clothes or keeping the clothes in your that are already in your wardrobe are all just fine. Like, especially the making the clothes, there's definitely lots of artistry and work that's gone into it, and it's amazing that people are making their own clothes as much as they are, which I at one point in my life I might have been very surprised that so many people would be sewing their own clothes. So I love that. And for many people, they don't need more, but I find like I get bored with things after a while. So it can be about sort of extending or reinvigorating the life of a garment, making you love it again if you haven't been wearing it. But it also could be just you've just finished something and it's great, but maybe you just want to like take it up a notch and sort of I liked you said something in the email about like deepening the connection between you and your clothing, and I love that idea. Like, and also expressing some of your it could be a message you want to tell the world, like I made this. Like you could literally applique letters that say I made this. If you're shy and maybe if you're so good at making clothes, people don't come up to you and say, "Oh, did you make that?" Or if they don't know you, so like you could broadcast that, or whatever. Like, and I'm trying to think of embellishing and decorating in sort of new and interesting ways, and maybe even a little more subtle than people might have done it in the past. There was that period that many of us remember firsthand, or we've just seen a lot of pictures. I'm talking about the 70s, where everybody was embroidering all over their jeans and their jeans. I love that. I'm definitely all for that period in time. But I'm saying maybe it doesn't have to be quite so blatant and bold. It could just be like adding a little bit of subtle stitching, around a collar or something, sort of just considering all the possibilities of how you can add and increase the creativity and maybe the color and the pattern and the visual interest to your clothing.
I love it. So what do you think the benefits are then of, we were talking about the deepening of the connection and stuff. I also like the idea of, because a lot of the techniques that we'll go into a bit more shortly, they involve hand stitching, don't they? Or doing things away from a machine, and maybe that's like flexing a different kind of creativity. Maybe it's something you can do, for example, like maybe when you're on your commute or you're not feeling well, or it's it's cold and you want to just sit on your sofa. It's something that maybe you could participate in and work on in different areas and different parts of your life.
Yes. I've been trying to sort of trace the roots and origins of what has brought me to teaching this class, because I feel like originally when I was making clothes like 25 years ago, I was a lot more bringing the art into it, like painting on the fabric and kind of embellishing a lot more. And then over the years, I think skills progressed. I've sort of toned things down a little bit and done a little bit less of that. And now I feel like I've come full circle and I'm wanting to bring it out. And then in the past 5-6 years, I've really come around to hand sewing in general, which for a long time, like people would say to me, oh, I always do my hems by hand or put in an invisible zipper by hand. And I was always like, good for you, but there's no way. Like, I'm totally a machine hemmer and a machine invisible zipper. And I really wasn't doing much hand sewing. I was maybe embroidering, but not doing any hand sewing for the construction of the garment. But then, purely by accident, a few years ago, I fell into hand sewing a garment. It was actually because I was doing the embellish something that I hadn't made it yet. I cut out a shirt and I was hand appliquing on it because I got into this hand applique moment. So I had the applique done, and then I realized I can't machine sew this shirt that I've spent so much time hand stitching on already. It just felt wrong. So I hand sewed the shirt, and then I was sort of like hooked for all the reasons you mentioned. And, you can be doing it like on a dock on the lake, and I teach at a lot of retreats that are like in the woods, in cabins on a lake and stuff like that. So any kind of creativity that we can do without plugging into machines is always beautiful, even if, as you said, it's just like to be on the couch in the evening with your family, like that. So I've been hand sewing a lot of garments and teaching that, and then doing the embellishment by hand is just sort of like, basically I want to just be on the couch all the time, really. Either on the couch or on a lake. And so, like, yeah, I like to just, I still love my machine. I'm not going to ever not machine sew, but the freedom and the quiet and the flexibility of doing things by hand is just a beautiful thing that I'm definitely, like, getting more and more attached to.
Yeah, absolutely. So if the listener is new to embellishing and personalizing their clothing, like after the construction phase, so what techniques would you recommend to try? Like, are there certain garments that you would recommend are better to start with than others?
Yeah. So probably the starting place I would suggest would be embroidery, just because it's very easy entry. All you need is a needle and some thread, and it can really be any kind of thread, although embroidery floss is very easy to find and very inexpensive. So I would suggest embroidering, because you can learn one stitch and just play with that for a while, and then, as soon as there are infinite stitches, there are hundreds and hundreds, but so you could go deep into learning stitches, but you could really just learn one or two or three and go for years or forever with just those. And there's all kinds of videos and, easy ways to learn them these days. So when it comes to what to stitch on, I'd say it can be tempting to think of things like, with a lot of construction, like maybe a jean jacket is a common, I don't know if anyone wears jean jackets these days, but it's just a classic style that I can picture with a lot of stitching on it. But there's a lot of layers to a jean jacket, and the fabric is heavy, denim, and everywhere that's got construction, like maybe the edges of the pocket flaps or the collar, which are where you think like, oh, I want to put some embroidery there, but it's going to be quite challenging and hard on your hands. So I might suggest something like a shirt or a skirt, because I guess the other one that goes hand in hand with the jean jacket is the jeans, but they also have a lot of construction. Like the middle of the jeans is probably fine, like the thigh, but anywhere that there's seams and pockets and loops and stuff is going to always be more challenging because you've got a lot of layers. So any garment that has a big open area that's just one piece of fabric is going to be your best bet.
Right, so maybe a t-shirt or a button-up shirt that's got like, quite clear front panels.
Yeah. A t-shirt can be good, but it maybe isn't where I'd start, just because the knit fabric sometimes has a little bit of its own challenge.
So when you're doing your embroidery, would you recommend that people use an embroidery hoop?
No. I know, controversial. Personally, I am not a hooper. I'm maybe even a little bit anti-hoop.
I
know.
I found some tea.
I know. I mean, if someone wants to try using a hoop or already loves using a hoop, that's fine. I just find that as a clothing maker and embroiderer onto clothing, it's two things really, but one is that because I'm working with clothing, I like to work with the fabric in its relaxed state. I feel like the hoop is going to stretch the fabric taut, and then when you do your stitching but release it from the hoop, sometimes the stitches will actually bubble up because the fabric was stretched. So I usually say, like, if you're embroidering a piece that's going to be stretched in a frame and hung on the wall, maybe use a hoop. But if it's a garment, I prefer to have it in its relaxed state. And then I think the even bigger reason is that I like to manipulate the fabric over the needle, like for running stitch, you know? So basically, I always like to put the needle in and right back out before I pull, because I feel like when you pull from the bottom, then you can't see where to come up and you have to poke around, and it's not only frustrating, but you're expending a lot of energy, like mostly mental energy, not physical energy. But you know, you have to poke to find the right place. And it's like for every stitch, if you have to poke 6 times until you right place, that's just a lot of extra stuff you're doing. So I'm very much into the in and right back up and then pull, which I feel like is a lot less times your arm has to stretch out and pull. So less repetitive stress on your body and just more flowing and more like forward motion.
So once you've got maybe a couple of embroidery projects under your belt, what else could you maybe have a go at? And do you have any favourite techniques that you like to use? Or any that even you're intrigued about and you haven't really had a chance to properly explore yet?
I do. One thing that I'm so excited about doing, so often I create a class kind of to get me doing something that I've been wanting to do, you know.
Oh, you've made some external accountability for yourself.
Exactly. So later on in the year, one of the topics we're going to cover is smocking. And I've been wanting to go deep on smocking since I don't know when, and kind of like bringing smocking into the modern world and making it a little more like interesting and, you know, less like a little girl's pink dress to wear, you know, to formal occasions, but more like an artful, casual, interesting kind of smocking. So that's one that I really haven't, I've like done smocking, I think, twice in my life, like 30 years apart. And I still like don't really fully get it. So I'm going to be spending the year learning it myself so that I can teach it. I think in October.
You've really got a deadline for that as well, haven't you? You can't put that.
I do. It's a hard, firm deadline, but it's also a long deadline. So hopefully I have time to get there. But another, you asked about like another favorite and a good place to go maybe after embroidery. I'm also very excited about block printing and painting on fabric because, I mean, you know, why wouldn't you want to? And if you're talking about art, like painting and printing are just, in many ways, they are art, or they're kind of like the default techniques that we do as kids. And actually, like I was poking around on the old internet to just, I don't think I was even looking for printing techniques, but I kept coming across all these things for kids that I realized these are perfect for adults too, because I definitely am very much drawn to the idea of just playing and doing things in a very like natural, you know, not like a highly skilled, highly complicated way. And I want everyone to be able to use things they already have at home and not have to go out and buy a whole bunch of supplies. So there's all kinds of great things you can do just by like wrapping string around a piece of cardboard and then dipping that in the ink or paint and stamping with it. And so I'm so excited to play with all that kind of thing.
Yeah. Why do kids have to have all the fun?
Exactly.
Do you know what I thought of that then? I just thought potato printing.
Totally, yeah. I prefer carrots.
Oh, top tip. Okay.
I just have found carrots are much firmer, and maybe certain potatoes are good, but whenever I've tried potatoes, they kind of like fall apart and they don't have a good texture.
Okay, that's a very good tip. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I've got a little hand print, like a tiny little screen printing kit, that I do not use enough. And when I do, even just add a little thing to something, it completely transforms the item.
I know.
Just wildly, and I think, why don't I do this more?
I know. Is it a GoCo?
It's do you know there's a Dutch brand called Bobbin Hood?
No.
She doesn't do them anymore, sadly, but she has these kits. And one year I asked for one for my birthday, and it's this really cute little screen. It's only small, and it's this like eco ink and a squeegee, and that's and some kind of slightly plasticized paper that you can make a stencil.
Yeah.
You know, so everything's for stenciling rather than having to, you know, transfer an image onto the screen.
Yeah.
It's all stencils. Anyway, it's so much fun.
It sounds a lot like the one I know called GoCo that was a Japanese thing that was, it's almost like a toy, but it totally works. And I have one too, and I never use it, and I don't know why, and maybe I will this year.
Well, maybe you could add a little addendum to your course to kind of force you to
Yes.
do it. So I asked the lovely Checkers patrons if they have any questions for you about embellishing garments, and they have some great questions. So let's get into them. So Beck asks, do you have any, straight into the embroidery questions. Do you have any tips on how to tidy up the inside of garments when embellishing with embroidery? And Beck says, I love pretty guts to my garments.
I love pretty guts. That's cool. I love the guts, and I don't necessarily need them to be pretty. But that doesn't mean I'm not a fan of making a big mess on the back of your embroidery. So
yeah, I suppose you don't want to be like tickled by any loose threads and things like that.
No, you don't want to be tickled, and you don't want anything to be able to get caught on like a long float. So I definitely try to keep my floats short. I don't know if I have an exact like limit, but if I'm gonna do something and then move to, something
right, that's called a float, is it?
I don't know the technical term in embroidery, but in like knitting or crochet, that's what it's called, so that's what I call it. But so I would tie off and then reconnect in a new place to avoid long floats. And I'm also a big fan of weaving in my tails on the back. I don't like just tie off the knot and then cut it really short, because I'm thinking clothing, and that means there's going to be laundering and wearing. If you cut something like a 1/4 inch from the knot, it's going to get worn and frayed, and the knot is going to come out, and then it's just going to undo. So I always weave in a little bit ideally into other stitches that are nearby, or sometimes you can do it into the fabric if there's like a double layer of fabric. And I'll even often go back and weave in the starting tail with a tiny crochet hook. That's a good tip for those tiny steel crochet hooks that are really small. You can grab the tails and weave them into some other stitches to help protect them. Oh, another thought might be to put a lining or a facing over that area or the whole garment. If you're not one to keep the back of your stitches tidy, or you just find you have a lot of long floats or something, you might do a lining, and then you don't have to worry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pick a garment that's got a lining.
Yeah.
And you can get inside. Awesome. So Kat asks, what's the best way to embellish with an embroidery machine, and what stabilizer to use? So Kat's saying that they've just bought a very cheap denim jacket to embellish and just need to decide on design and stabilizer. Like, do you have any experience in embroidery machines? And I don't know, like, would they use different stabilizers, do you think, to hand?
I don't use stabilizer at all, and I've also never used an embroidery machine, so I can't necessarily fully answer that, but I know a lot of people use stabilizers with hand embroidery too, and I know they can be helpful, especially with knits, because knits are stretchy and can be a little bit flimsy, and it can help to have the stabilizer to give it more structure while you're stitching, and then it dissolves. Like the kind I've heard people say are great for knits are the ones that dissolve away later. But what I just don't like the idea of using kind of synthetic and chemically things in my clothes, and even the ones that dissolve away, I'm like, but now is that like in our water? You know, like I just don't like the idea of it.
Yeah. I kind of feel like if Kat's embroidering on a denim jacket, presumably that's fairly stable as it is, no?
I feel the same way. Like a denim jacket probably doesn't need any stabilizer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Jen's got a good question. How do you get over the fear of ruining your embellished garment in the wash?
Yes. Washing's important, so we need to be always thinking about that. Washing and wearing. So how do I get over the fear? I guess by thinking proactively, like I said, about weaving in the ends and things like that. So like as I'm doing it, I'm imagining, I'm thinking of longevity and imagining the stuff that the garment's going to go through.
Do you tend to hand wash garments that you've embellished so there's a little less agitation or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess most of my handmade garments, I do wash them in the machine, but I don't put them in the dryer, which really, that's like all my clothes, to be clear. It's like I only really have clothes that I made. So that definitely helps. But if I don't think, I'm just trying to think if I have any clothing that I've stitched on that I feel like I need to hand wash. And I usually do my hand sewing or hand embellishing. Like, I don't do any really long stitches. I don't do, like, if I do a big area of satin stitch, which I really never do, but I wouldn't, like, make long stitches over a big area. I would do lots of shorter ones. So if you keep all of your stitches maybe like a 1/4 inch or less, and then weave in all your ends, I feel like things are pretty stable and secure. You might put them in one of those mesh bags if you have one to protect it, and you might turn it inside out too. But I feel like I try to make my stitches fairly short so that they stay stable and they can be washed. Like, I'm always thinking of that. So I try to always, like, from the beginning, make sure it's going to be able to handle whatever we might put it through, because I want my clothes to last a long time. And
yeah, you don't want to be nervous about actually wearing them.
No, yeah.
I love that. So Louise expanded on that somewhat by asking, like, are all embroidery threads and notions and embellishments created equal when it comes to something needing to be washed? Like, presumably, like, the different fibres that you could use would be potentially affected by laundering.
Yeah, that's true. I guess that question is making me want to, like, do a test of, I actually just came across a YouTube video, I think yesterday, of this woman who she has like 50 different kinds of embroidery thread, and she shows doing the same stitch. Like, I watched one where she did a lazy daisy stitch in 50 different threads, and it was kind of fascinating. And then at the end she said, for this kind of effect, like, these ones were good, but now I want to do a wash test on like 50 kinds of thread, which I have not yet done, but now I feel like I should.
Well, you should contact this woman because she's got the samples ready. Say, look, you know what you need to do. Part 2, put them in the wash.
And she would probably love that because she's one of those YouTube creators that's like, tell me what you want. So thank you for pointing that out. It wouldn't have occurred to me. Yeah, so that said, because I do sometimes stitch with like wool. I have some wool threads, and I do sometimes wonder, is this going to shrink up? And I so far I haven't had any bad experience with any washing, like destroying any of my stitching. But I will say that the more twisted, and I don't know what the word is, but like you can kind of tell when you look at a thread if it's very like smooth and tightly spun that it's going to last longer, whereas like a rougher, like actually the 6-strand embroidery floss I feel like is not the strongest and longest lasting, because all those plies that are meant to be separated, but if you actually are using all 6 strands, I would suggest sort of twisting it as you go, because otherwise they do tend to kind of separate and get caught on things. And like a lot of the sashiko threads I feel like have more twist in them and probably will last longer, but I've never noticed any of my stitching sort of like falling apart in the wash or anything. So
Well, that's good to know.
people shouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah. A link to that. Anne asks, do you have any tips on how to care for them in terms of pressing or ironing? Like, have you found that heat has affected the sheen of any of them? I'm presuming like press on the wrong side if you want to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I really tend to press anything.
And that's a tip in itself. Don't.
Yeah, that's pretty much my tip. Like, I mean, I don't tend to iron. I iron when I'm sewing, but then once the thing is done and washed, I don't ever iron it again. So that would include things I've embroidered on. But I guess if you wanted to embroider or iron something you've embroidered, I would probably do it back and maybe use a pressing cloth. Like, I wouldn't want to put a hot iron right onto the threads, I think. And it's probably fine. I only use natural fiber threads even to stitch with, but definitely if you had any like metallic or, I don't know, questionable like glitter threads that have like synthetics in them, you don't want to be ironing.
Questionable threads.
You know, like I pretty much only use cotton and maybe a little wool, maybe a little silk, but yeah, I tend to not delve into the synthetics. But, you know, sometimes you might find those at a thrift store or something, and then, you know, using them is still keeping them out of the landfill. So there's definitely situations where people might be, but definitely be careful ironing those. I don't really think anything needs to be ironed, though, is my easy out answer.
You just read my mind because I was just about to ask, like, where do you tend to get your supplies? Like, are you looking around in the thrift stores, or do you have certain sources that you like to tend to go to?
Sorry, I'm just
I mean, I'm thinking that if you're like traveling all over the place, presumably you're teaching in some amazing craft stores with some incredible stock.
That is exactly where my mind went, because the way you asked it, you said sort of like, how do you seek out? And I'm more like trying to hold back, like, please don't come home with me. Because yes, I'm always traveling around and teaching at these lovely shops, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I need some souvenirs to bring home with me. So I try to keep it minimum, but threads, like I don't know how long it's been, but probably the past 10 years or so, I've been trying not to buy any more fabric and yarn because I have a lot and I'm trying to work through it. But so threads have been my sort of like guilty pleasure. Like if I buy a few embroidery threads, you know, they're very small and they're just a couple dollars and they don't take up a lot of space and I don't feel as guilty. So I definitely have a lot, but I do, like when I see them at a thrift store, it's hard to resist because they're often like interesting, strange colors, or like, because they're the colors, you know, somebody didn't use or nobody wanted. And sometimes they've been like sun faded, you can tell, or they have like discoloration, and that makes it all the more appealing to.
So like you feel sorry for them, like, I'll rescue you, I'll give you a home.
Yes, I am definitely a sucker for rescuing the unwanted craft supplies. I really feel like when it comes to embroidery threads, like if you just open your eyes, like they're all around you, you know, like if you ask people you know, like they'll come to you. They're definitely widely available.
Yeah, I think about all those threads that people have bought for maybe a cross stitch or something, and they've only used a little bit. I mean, how many of those little tiny skeins are in people's drawers? Probably millions.
Exactly. And I don't know if this is happening in the UK, but I love that there's been this trend here in the US, and I imagine it's happening all over the world, of these, I guess you call them stores, where like basically their whole business model is all the people who have all these things in their house and decide to finally clean out and downsize donate all their stuff to these shops. And I mean, essentially they're just thrift stores for
Yeah, I think they're referred to as creative reuse stores. Possibly.
yes. It's just great because like so many of the craft people have like way too many supplies because we've tried all the different crafts and got good at them and did them but then burned out or like for whatever reason moved on to something else.
Yeah. Or you realize, like, okay, paper craft is not for me.
Yeah. So I love supporting those places, and I think it's great that they're opening all the time.
Absolutely. By the time that this episode comes out, I would have published another episode with a quilter named Rada Weaver. She's sewing through fog on Instagram.
Yes.
I don't know if you know her. And on her website, she's got a map that maps mainly in the US and Canada, but a few other places of all the creative reuse centers across the US and Canada. Amazing.
I just learned about that map, and I just learned about her because I got the emails from that Feel Good Fibers that she just bought or took over. And so, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, really exciting. Okay, we've got one more patron question. This one's a bit more general. So, Floor is looking for tips on where to place embellishments. So they say, I'm never quite sure what would work. What would be helpful in combination of visible mending as well? Sometimes, like, if a mend is in like an awkward spot, like without... How do you make it look intentional without then sitting there forever and darning and embellishing a million more stars or flowers or whatever,
Well, that was going to be one of my tips. But the actual question really, I think, is easier because when it's just embroidery or embellishment and you can put it anywhere, then you can put it anywhere. So,
yeah. But how do you know when you're done as well? Like, how do you have to hold yourself back? Enough, Cal, enough.
Are you ever done? I mean...
Well, I don't know. This is the question.
I know. I agree. But, I mean, the nice thing, and I feel this way kind of about, like, so many kinds of making is, or at least when it comes to clothes, I always say, like, until you've worn it a few times and started to experience it, you can always add more. So like nothing ever has to be finished, but
Good point.
We do have to stop and move on to another project at some point.
You could potentially unpick as well, couldn't you, if you decided maybe that's too much.
If you've gone too far, you can definitely undo, at least with the stitching kinds of things, not so much with the block printing. So, but back to the question about where to put things. I mean, there's so many possibilities, and depending on the garment, different placements might lend themselves better. I tend not to be a fan of like the central front placement, which is many people's sort of automatic go-to.
Yeah, often because that's where a decal on a t-shirt or something often is, isn't it? So that's where you kind of think, well, that's where embellishment goes.
Right. So I'm such a fan of that. But then when it comes to the mending or like covering stains, that's often where the stains and things are, which is unfortunate. So for now, let's not worry about those things because those dictate the placement for you. And I think really the only way to work around that is what you said, to like add more in other places so that doesn't become the focal point. But I'm a big fan of, asymmetry in general. So I'll often put something like on one shoulder and then maybe a little more on the other hip.
Oh.
And I'm also a fan of definitely wrapping over to the back and, like not even thinking front or back, but maybe like over the shoulder or around the side seam or.
Oh, I love that.
And I also am a big fan of, you can just have a little splotch. People often get carried away and think like they need embroidered flowers all over the garment. If there's too much, you don't appreciate it. If you have just like a little something, then it is a focal point and people will notice it and, look closely and appreciate it. But if you do it all over, you kind of lose the focal point. So I'm a big fan of a little goes a long way, and placing it in interesting, unexpected places.
I love that as well. I like the idea of, going over a seam, over a shoulder, or maybe from the front onto the sleeve or something, because that's a real way to mark out what you're doing in contrast to something that's mass produced, isn't it? Because for a garment, in terms of mass production, for a garment to have something that transfers over a seam, that would be quite an expensive thing to do, wouldn't it, in terms of mass production? But that's something that we can do easily ourselves that really kind of marks it out away from that,
Yes, and that used to be often at the front of my mind, and now I'm remembering like that used to be how I would think would always be, I want to do things that can't be done in production, basically, like working across a seam or like crocheting on the edge of something, because crochet cannot be done by machines. And I used to really think about that a lot. I want to only do things that machines can't do or production can't do, probably because I had come from working in the industry and being limited to only doing things that could be done in production, and then I wanted to do the opposite. So I still feel that way. Like anytime you can do something that breaks the laws of what production can do, it's a beautiful thing, because hands are the best form of making.
Well, I have to ask now. I know I said that I was not going to ask you a bunch of stuff that you've already mentioned on the podcast, and I'm going to put some links to some really good podcast episodes that you've done on other amazing podcasts if you do want to hear more about Cal's fascinating background. But we have to mention that you did go to design school and you became like a fashion designer, didn't you? Which is obviously all about mass production, and you work for Urban Outfitters. And now you are teaching hand skills. You're using like a lot of natural fibers. That's your preference, you say. So that's the kind of extremes, no? Like, was a lot of what you're doing now, I guess, like a reaction from what you learn, I guess, is my question.
Well, actually, not so much, because like it's really like what I'm doing now is pulling out the parts I love from what I did. Like, and we actually mostly, at the time when I was a designer for Urban Outfitters, we pretty much only did natural fibers. And because it was sort of like just before the fast fashion boom, we were not actually like creating things very quickly. Like the process of production back then was pretty long, maybe 9 to 12 months or something.
Right. So maybe some actual fitting happened along the way.
Oh yeah, totally fitting. Really it was amazing. We even could do a lot of crochet and things because we worked with countries like India where they had a lot of handwork. So it was actually in many ways amazing, and I loved it, and I got to be really creative. But I think it's as like the internet took place that the communication and like speeding up of the fast fashion industry really took off, and that was just starting to happen as I was sort of realizing that the fashion industry was not for me. I don't know, I forgot what the question was, but
No, you've answered the question. But I'm guessing that, because I know that you come from a very crafty kind of background, I'm guessing that even whilst you were working for Urban Outfitters, you were doing things yourself for yourself in your own time as well.
Not exactly, because I had no time. Like, I worked, I mean, I was so into my job because the job was really creative and really fun. So I was doing a lot of creative things, but they were all for work. Like, we would just come up with these crazy ideas, and we would do things like paint and embroider on fabric, and then that would be like the initiation of the design, and then we would send samples that we made overseas, and the production people would do them. But it was actually very like small scale and interesting, and we worked with a lot of like artisans, and it was pretty cool in those ways.
What did lead you to leave them?
Well, I think I was there for 8 years, and in that time it was starting to shift over to more of a mass production, or it was always mass production, but it was relatively small scale in the beginning. But they went public, and it became more about like what the shareholders wanted, and only focusing on things that would sell. Like whatever sold best last year was what they wanted us to do the next year. And the embracing of creative ideas that the designers presented became less and less appreciated. And I just knew that, it was time for me basically to leave the whole industry, because that company was always sort of an outlier in terms of being more creative and like following its own drum, whereas most companies, it's just all about like the trends that are forecasted, and they all kind of do the same thing. So that was when I left and opened a store, and that was where I started teaching, and then that was sort of what took me off in this whole different direction that I just get to play and explore, and then teach people how to play and explore.
So where did the idea for this workshop come then? Because it kind of, in a way, almost feels like inevitable, because you are so multidisciplinary and you do have a real variety of interests in terms of like crafty disciplines. Like, where did the idea to kind of bring them all together in this way come from?
Yeah, I've been thinking lately, like, it's like life has sort of led to this moment of teaching this class. I don't exactly know like what made it happen right now, except that I just feel like maybe what we need in the world is a little more play and creativity and beautiful things, because there's some difficult things going on out there. And I just realized that like in my own wardrobe, I've gotten kind of boring, because for a long time I think I made a lot of sort of wild clothes, and then I would try to like put together an outfit and nothing went together because they were all kind of wild and artistic. So then I was like, okay, I should make some things solid colors sometimes. So I did that so that I had things to wear with the wild things. But then now I feel like it's been a long time since I kind of forgot about doing the wild things. So it's just sort of, like a pendulum, and I'm flowing back into the why make boring clothes like when you can make fun artistic clothes. So it's really just been like a process my whole life. I realize now that I've been leading to this direction. Like I've for many years I've taught embroidery, I've taught crochet, I've taught block printing as separate things, and now I'm just like, let's do it all. And I've really been loving longer format classes. Like, so often I teach at events or even just at a shop. They just want to do like a one-time 3 class, and there's just not that much you can do. I mean, there are things you can do in 3 hours, but I would prefer we keep coming back and like exploring it deeper and deeper. So like I teach format of class in person a lot where it's like 5 days all day and we really go deep into pattern drafting and making clothes. But then the past few years I've been doing that as an online virtual class that's a year long. And that format I just love because you have so much time in between to practice what you've learned. And then we come back and we do another topic. And only virtual can really work that way because otherwise everyone would need to live close enough to me to come once a month for a year. And that's just not really,
Yeah. I suppose it's nice as well, like if you've got a question, like if you're doing a one-off class, you might not then have the opportunity to ask a question if something comes up. But if you're doing a once a month thing, I tried that, but it didn't quite work. Where did I go wrong? And you can really get the knowledge that you need at a deeper level, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I think the more times a class can meet, the better. And whenever I see like learn to knit or learn to crochet and it's just like a 1 session, 2-hour class, I'm like, you can't learn those things in 1 session because you're going to go home and practice and then you're going to have trouble and questions and
you're going to drop a stitch and you don't know what to do.
Yeah. And I hate to think of people then getting stuck and just not knowing where to turn and maybe out of frustration, putting their things aside and not coming back to it. And
or deciding, this is not for me.
Yes, or that I failed or I'm not good at that. But it's really just you need like a two-way street of learning and communication for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been having a back and forth messaging with one of my amazing patrons, and they're a teacher, and they brought up a concept to me about keeping learning warm. So like going over things again and again. It's not just like a one and done. And I've really taken that on board, and I've been thinking about how I can apply that to my podcast, because I think there's the assumption that, I've mentioned that once, whatever the topic is. I've said that then, like if everyone's going to get really bored if I mention it again. But I don't think that that's true, especially if you're coming at it from maybe a slightly different angle or at a different level, like you can go back over those things that have been discussed before, and that kind of just helps create a deeper understanding or level of connection to something,
I love that. And I find learning and teaching very interesting. And I was never trained to be a teacher, so I don't really know like how to teach or, how, like technically speaking. But I love the idea of, for example, this class that we're talking about is starting the day after tomorrow on Saturday. And we're starting with embroidery because I figured it was just like an easy entry thing that, people don't need a lot of supplies. But it occurred to me over the past week or two that probably most of the people who've signed up for this class, many of whom I already know, like they know how to embroider. Like a lot of them have done Alabama Shannon garments and, they're doing their whole lives. So I realized that. So I asked them all, like, do you know running stitch and a few other basic stitches? And so far, all but one have said yes. So now I don't want to leave the one person, high and dry and not start from the beginning. But I kind of realized, like, we could almost just start with running stitch and spend the whole first class could just be on running stitch. Because instead of like thinking, all these people know a bunch of stitches, so I should find some really like advanced stitches that they don't know, I'd almost prefer to go back to the beginning and like go deep on one thing. Because when I teach embroidery, I usually teach like 12 different stitches, and we kind of just whiz through them and like move on to the next one because we only have for 3 hours. That's not really the way to learn, in my opinion. Like, I think spending 2 hours on just running stitch, so even though like everyone knows running stitch, but it's like, but do you really know running stitch? Like,
yeah, but you were saying that technique about manipulating the fabric and not necessarily poking it down and pulling it through and then pushing it up. I mean, you've already told me, I know what running stitch is, and you already said 2 things that I hadn't considered. So, I would have put my hand up and said, yes, I know running stitch, but already you told me 2 things that I didn't know. So. So it's definitely worth going back.
Aside from just the doing of it, there's like, well, now how are you going to space it? And how far are you going to place the rows between each other? And you could use a heavier thread or a lighter thread, or you could make it very dense. You know, there's just so many different aspects. So I'm excited.
Awesome. Do you think you're likely to run this? I mean, because unfortunately we're talking about this amazing course and people can't sign up, but do you think you'd be likely to run it again?
Absolutely. I feel like I'll probably be running it for the rest of my life, because I think it's, like I said, the class that my whole life has been gearing toward. And, you know, it's probably just going to get better and better. So anyone who's interested should maybe just, I'll try to be a little better about posting on Instagram, or maybe I'll do some posts on my website, because I think following along with this first year will be interesting, because it's very much a new thing and I'm really just making it up as I go along. So yeah, I'm sure it'll happen again.
Awesome. And it'll be so interesting as well to see what your students come up with as well, because they're bound to take in directions that maybe you hadn't considered.
I can't wait. I think it's going to be very much like a collective, really, more than a class. And like it relates a lot to the other year-long class I've been teaching for a while called Hat Club, which is about pattern drafting and really about like taking a basic pattern and all the ways you can hack it into all sorts of other things. And I've had like a lot of people this year are taking it for the third year in a row, because partly why I called it a club was that I wanted it to feel more like a community and not like I'm the teacher and you're all the students, but like what can we all bring to the table, and we all learn from seeing what each other does. And the third year people are like really just sort of coming into their own and like feeling confident to do it. And so it's been so fun to watch. And I imagine that we haven't even said, I think, the name of the class, have we?
It's the Artful Garment.
Okay, so I think the Artful Garment is going to be the same way, where it just keeps getting better and better.
Amazing. So for people who would like to keep on top of what you're up to and maybe get some sneak peeks into what comes and what transpires from that class, and learn about all the other classes that you host and that you teach, where can people find you?
Well, calpatch.com is my website, and pretty much you can find everything from there. My Instagram is Hodgepodge Farm, which, you know, we won't get into why that is still my Instagram name.
That's another
podcast.
Another thing, yeah. You have a newsletter as well, no?
I do. I'm very bad about sending it out. It's usually just a couple times a year, but that is a good way to stay in the loop. Don't worry about getting too many emails from me. You definitely won't.
You're too busy embellishing.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your inspiration. It's been an absolute dream to get to talk to you after so many years.
Yay! Thank you so much, Zoe. I'm a big fan of Check Your Thread.
Aww.
Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!